Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello and welcome to our Monday Night Truth and Liberty live cast. I'm Andrew Wommack. I've got our Chief Counsel here, Richard Harris, with us, and man, we're going to have a great broadcast tonight. We've got State Senator Ted Alexander with us from North Carolina, and we'll be introducing him a little bit better in a few minutes. You know, today, for those of you that didn't know, we started a Truth Lovers broadcast today. We had our inaugural program at 3 o'clock Mountain Time till 4:30. And I spent about 20 minutes sharing the word, but then I took over an hour's worth of questions. And I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it.
I watched it. I thought it was great.
And so we're going to do that through Friday. We're going to do it 5 days this week. Each day it'll start at 3 p.m. So if you are available to watch that, I think it was really good today. I dropped a bomb on people about the rapture.
Yes, you did.
And so anyway, tune in. Tuesday through Friday of this week, 3 o'clock, and that'll be a great deal. So yes. What else you have to share before we get to our senator here?
Oh, well, just wanted to welcome everybody who's watching and remind everybody to check out the resources section of our website at truthandliberty.net, where you can find all kinds of helpful information to help you stand for truth in the public square. Right now, we've got a lot of interest in vaccine mandates and all things vaccine, and you can check out some links we've got there that will help you find some information that you may need. And also coming up here at Andrew Wommack Ministries, well, the holidays are just right around the corner, and we just finished the women's, I want to say women's advance, Andrew, but I know that's not.
Arise.
Women Arise.
There
sorry.
You go.
But the next great thing coming up here is the Heart of Christmas show. It's an amazing performance that will just remind you about, all the things we love about Christmas, and especially about the birth of Jesus and what it really means. So you can find out more information about that on our website at awmi.net and purchase tickets there. Make plans for your whole family to come out here to Colorado. How about Christmas in the Rockies? Another thing that's going on is we're going to have a live nativity the weekend after, December 16th to the 19th, right here on the campus of Charis Bible College. And I'm telling you, it's beautiful out here, and that live nativity is just awesome. So check out those events. Also, I want to invite you to become a subscriber to Truth and Liberty. If you're not already, you can do that on our website by going to the upper right-hand corner there and clicking subscribe. And if you just share your email with us, we will make sure that you get our blogs and our informational emails that go out again, with information, links, action alerts, and those kinds of things that will help you make a difference in our culture. And if you subscribe today, you'll be eligible to receive a free product. Last week, we gave away Andrew's book, A Better Way to Pray, and Elena Bias. Congratulations on that, Elena. You're going to get an email from us letting you know how you can claim that free gift. This week, we're giving away Andrew's book. It's called Discover the Keys to Staying Full of God. I think this is based on Romans chapter 1. It's
verse 20.
Verse 20.
21, excuse me.
21. Anyway, Andrew walks through. That's a verse that's chock so full of meaning. It's incredible what you do to that. And yep. There's so much that you can learn from that. And so subscribe today, be eligible for that. Also, if you're not a member of the Truth and Liberty Coalition, you can become one. You say, what's a member? Well, those are the folks who've decided to partner with us financially to help us stand for truth. That's what we're doing here, and to equip the body of Christ. We do what we do through your generosity. You can be a member today by going on our website to the donate page. Sign up to give an automatic recurring gift of $5 or more per month, and you'll become a Truth and Liberty Coalition member. And we will send you Alex McFarland's book, The Assault on America, How to Defend Our Nation Before It's Too Late. And we appreciate that so much. Last thing tonight is if you need prayer, Andrew's got a whole giant room full of trained Spirit-filled prayer ministers standing by 24/7 now. Just call in at 719-635-1111.
Okay, and tonight we have with us Senator Ted Alexander. Richard and I both met him when we were at the National Association of Christian Lawmakers, and I'm serving on the advisory board there. I don't know how I got on a lawmakers advisory board, but I'm honored to do it. And Ted spoke there, and anyway, he's just a blessing. And he's in his second term serving in the North Carolina State Senate. He serves as the chairman of the state's of the Senate State and Local Government Committee and the General Government and Operations Budget Committee. He's a member of the Senate Appropriations, Finance, Pensions and Retirement, Commerce and Insurance and Appropriation. Anyway,
wow.
He's doing a lot. And we are just really honored that Senator Alexander would spend time with us tonight. So welcome to our Truth and Liberty broadcast, Ed.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and what a pleasure it is to be with you and Richard tonight. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So anyway, give us a little bit of background first before we get into discussing things. How did you get into politics and run for the Senate? I mean, you would have to be called or crazy to do something like that. I
think it's a little bit of both. I think, you know, it's one of those kinds of things. I think God had put that in my heart from a young age. I was probably always a very different kind of kid in terms of having an interest in government and politics and that sort of thing. When on Sunday afternoons after church, when other people would go watch football games and stuff, I would watch Meet the Press. So I always had an interest in those kinds of things. But also when I went to college, I majored in political science and was involved with the North Carolina Student Legislature at the time. And that was really a very transformative type of program that I was involved with, because it really taught you a lot about government and how bills were passed and so forth. So that stuck with me, and I just had that, I guess, calling, I suppose, all that time. It was probably about around 2002, 2003 that I actually went to a Wild at Heart retreat put on by John Eldridge, and really just hit me that, you know, I really needed to get involved and really needed to do something about it. And I'd been kind of toying with the idea, I think, of running locally for mayor. And lo and behold, I did. And I was an underdog and nobody thought I could win. And I did. I won. And with God's help, I served for 8 years and I term limited myself. And then I began to get more involved with the party after that, the Republican Party. And subsequently found myself in the North Carolina Senate.
So let me ask you about how does a Christian, a person with moral convictions, navigate through being in the legislature today? It seems like, you know, I forgot the name of the senator, but he just it might have been a representative that just literally stopped somebody and said that the Bible has no bearing on what we do here and stuff. You probably know exactly who I'm talking about.
I heard about that. I think that was some congressman up in the U.S. House, I believe. I can't remember who it was.
Jerry Nadler. It was Jerry Nadler. Yeah.
Jerry Nadler.
New York. Yep.
So anyway, with that kind of an attitude, anti-Christian attitude in our government today, do you experience any of that there in North Carolina? How do you stand for your moral convictions?
You know, somewhat. It may not be as pronounced as in the U.S. Congress or maybe in some other states. in North Carolina, we still have, we still say prayers before the Senate convenes each day. We have a chapel service each Wednesday while we're in session. The Republicans have a prayer caucus for various members who want to participate, and also the Capitol Commission, as you're probably familiar with, does weekly Bible studies. And there are, I would say, a fair number, a large number, I think, of dedicated Christians who work in and around the legislature. So it may not be as pronounced a distinction. However, it is still sometimes can be a struggle. Even within our party, there are differences sometimes in how people interpret their Christianity and live it out. But all in all, to me, it is. I couldn't do anything but that. I have to live out, my Christian beliefs, and that informs how I approach all kinds of legislation that may have moral implications. And so I really, sometimes you take a little bit of grief for it. I'm sure that my district, I think, is probably more conservative, and there are probably more churchgoers and so forth than many others. So, but I know that there are people out there who do not, and who probably, feel very strongly that I may be too Christian in the way that I, profess my faith.
Well, sad to say, it seems across the nation that our nation is becoming more and more secular when it was founded as a Christian nation. And I tell you, it's just tragic to see what's happening. So it was a couple of years ago that North Carolina, I think, took the stand on refusing to allow men into women's restrooms. And man, they were boycotted over that. And how's that played out? Has the boycott affected North Carolina? What's happened?
Well, at the time, it was a tremendous controversy. This was just before I came on in the Senate. And there were all sorts of calls for boycotts, and the legislature took a lot of heat. The governor at the time took a lot of heat for this passage. The way they ended up leaving it is, I think they basically, the legislature at the time, sort of kind of what they had done was passed a law which said that local governments could not pass ordinances which allowed transgender bathrooms, where it allowed men in women's bathrooms. And because some of the localities were passing such ordinances to allow that, Charlotte most notably, Charlotte-Mecklenburg. So that's where the problem started. That's why the legislation was proposed and passed. And then after the huge uproar, eventually, I think probably unfortunately, the legislature did somewhat change its stance and basically said, we're not going to, we're going to put this on a moratorium until 2021 and revisit it. They put it till 2021, and I don't think anything has been revisited. So my understanding is that localities now can do that, but it did not go well at the time. It was a huge fight at the time.
So it sounds like the woke culture kind of won out there, at least.
In my opinion, I think that they gained some ground on that. I do, and I know why the legislature did it at the time, what they did, but and it was very tough. I think that they had to have Democrat votes in order to pass that particular law at the time, because I don't think a majority of the Republicans voted for that. I guess it's called a rescindance of that ordinance.
And you aren't very far from Loudoun County, Virginia, where they've allowed the transgenders, and that girl was raped by a boy wearing a skirt and stuff. Has any of this crept into North Carolina? Is the critical race theory or this transgenderism stuff coming into the schools there?
Well, the critical race theory, I think, has been building up for a long, long time. If you look back over, 30, 40 years, this sort of train of thought has been building steam. And I think only recently, as is so often the case, we Christians sort of, we get blindsided because we've been living our lives and doing things otherwise, not paying attention. But it has really, I think, blossomed. It is probably not quite as pronounced in North Carolina in some areas of the state. I think some of the larger cities, it is fairly pronounced, where they rather than teaching civics and the importance of, the history of our country and its founding, you will find questions on tests and curricula such as, how would you feel if you were a woman at the time of some era or something. It's all very subjective kind of stuff, and really doesn't, I don't think, get you from point A to point B. The math is now considered, racist. And in the university systems, Andrew, in the university system, I think it's really in some of our universities, particularly, it seems to have just become quite rampant. I'll give you an example. Just recently at what most would consider the flagship University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life brought in a speaker. I won't mention the name, but brought in a speaker from a group called Social Responsibility Speaks. And essentially, it was mandatory for the students in the sororities and fraternities to attend. And in that presentation that was made, and which I think we actually have ultimately a link, and people can probably watch it or see, there was basically claims that land in North Carolina was stolen, that grocery stores and the size of the aisles and the height of the shelves are oppressive because not everyone can reach the top shelf. Airlines are oppressive because not everybody can fit into an average size seat. Did you know that?
Well, I knew that.
Yeah, they're oppressive because some people are different sizes, and that our society disempowers or sometimes harms people who are left-handed, and that whiteness and white privilege pervade our society, and that whiteness and white privilege can be juxtaposed with other tenets of oppression. It just goes on and on. That again, it's almost a dismantling of our entire structure of how you look at things. Critical race theory is a pretty toxic, I think, way of looking at things, and also as is its cousins of intersectionality to a large degree, the whole issues of social justice and white privilege, those phrases, all of that, it really doesn't help our society in terms of what we traditionally want to do, which is live peaceably with each other, to tolerate each other, and to be able to get along with each other and to respect each other.
So if
CRT,
I'm not mistaken, in North Carolina, you have the legislature, the Congress and Senate are conservative, but you got a Democratic governor. So is any of this, is that going to be a bulwark, a stop against all of this liberal stuff? How's it working out?
Well, we are doing what we can in the legislature, both in the Senate and the House. Again, we don't have super veto-proof majorities. For instance, Andrew, we did pass a bill in both houses that would basically tell public schools that they could not promote a lot of these sorts of CRT premises, such as one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Now, who could argue with that? But we were saying that, yes, because it was vetoed. Some of the other tenets that we said you should not or could not teach as an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex, which is essentially what CRT proposes. That an individual, solely by virtue of his or her race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. And, you know, that is so contrary not only to, I think, just common sense, but it's very contrary to us as Christians who believe that, you know, we're not responsible for the sin of, other than the original sin, which we all fall under, but those specific sins that, you know, individuals did, we are not responsible for those. We can't be held accountable for what they did years ago. And there is no grace or forgiveness in the critical race world, theory world, and which is, again, completely anti-Christian.
Yeah,
but those kinds of things we passed, and unfortunately, it was vetoed.
You know, in the Old Testament, it said that there was a proverb about the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge, but it says that won't be said anymore. And it was a prophecy about Jesus that every man will give an account for their own sins and they'll stand before God. So that is a biblical principle, and CRT and all of this
Reparations.
Project 1619, reparations,
yes,
everything.
All of that, it's very related, all related. And
it's completely against the Word of God. It is an ungodly principle.
It is. And I'll just say, Andrew, I think one of the best books that I have seen to encapsulate that, what you just said, and make the argument and how anti-biblical it is, and basically how anti-civil rights it is. Yeah. It was a book by Vodi Bakum, which is Fault Lines, and I would encourage anybody to look at that book and read it as fast as you can, because it will open up your eyes in terms of the game that's being played through critical race theory. And I think he speaks with a lot of authority, and he has a very good take on how this is really basically goes against all the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yep. You know, Vodi Bachman, I got to hear him speak at a recent conference, and he's a black guy. For those who don't know that, he's currently running a Bible college in Africa somewhere, but he's American by birth, and articulate, powerful speaker, strong grasp of the Bible and theology. So I haven't read that book yet myself, but I'm wanting to. So Senator, tomorrow's an election day here. It's an off year, but we've got important school board races going on here in Colorado. What's happening there in North Carolina? Do you have any elections?
We do. We have mostly this year is a kind of an off-year election. We're not like the state of Virginia, where they're electing their governor just north of us, but it's mainly local elections. But those local elections, you know, can have some pretty significant consequences, as was demonstrated by our discussion just a little while ago about what some of the larger cities were doing with, you know, the bathrooms and so forth. But, you know, it's from these local elections that, well, folks like myself, either one get a jumping off point, or they get a platform. And so that's why, and plus they make policy. So that's why these local elections are very critical, but Christians need to get out and vote at the local elections as well. And so many times they just, we ignore them. And then we wonder why we get the kinds of actions that we get. So I would encourage people, particularly Christian folk, you know, to go vote your convictions during the elections coming up tomorrow. All over, of course, not only North Carolina, but all over the country.
So let me ask you
Virginia.
about the federal mandates on the mask, the vaccinations and stuff like this. You've got federal employees there. Are any of the cities enforcing this with their police force, with their fire departments? How's it going in North Carolina?
Well, in North Carolina, to my knowledge, there are some governmental entities that I believe that are trying to enforce mandated vaccines, and we are trying our best to try to, or at least I'm totally opposed to mandates for vaccines. I don't have anything against the vaccine itself. People are helped by that, and that's a good thing. But to compel somebody to do this, I think is really wrong. We've seen hospitals that are mandating it for their workers, whereas just last year these people were considered heroes, and now just because they may have some strong religious beliefs against it, that they're being basically shown the door. Now they are allowing exemptions, and they should, but sometimes people are not getting them when they request them, and I just think this is wrong. But it's not a good path that we're going down, I don't think, for mandating these kinds of vaccines.
So like in New York and in Dallas-Fort Worth with American Airlines, they've been having problems because of the staffing. People are calling in sick to protest all of this. Is that happening in North Carolina?
To some degree, yeah. I think is with some of the healthcare facilities, we have a shortage of nursing folks and healthcare providers in any event. And of course, it's been exacerbated by COVID. And now we're telling people, okay, if you don't get a vaccine and you don't have the appropriate argument for a religious exemption of some kind, then we're going to let you go. And that's only going to make things worse in terms of our health care and the ability to provide health care for folks, because we're short-staffed anyway. I just think it's a very wrong-headed kind of, we should be putting more emphasis, in my opinion, on making sure that if you get the COVID, that you get that treatment that has been proven so effective, which is, I believe, the ivermectin and the hydrochloroquine, none of which I can ever pronounce. But
you did real good.
Those kinds of treatments, when provided early on, seem to have a very good effect. And to me, I'd like to see us put more emphasis on that as opposed to making people have a vaccine.
Yep. And Texas, they had an argument, I believe, before the Supreme Court today about their abortion restrictions. And then on December the 1st, they're arguing a case that could overturn Roe versus Wade. Do you have any feel for how North Carolina would respond if that was kicked back to the state? Would they outlaw abortion or place restrictions on it?
Well, I believe that if we get the supermajorities and if we have a governor who is a conservative, I think we will be able to make quite a bit of progress in terms of, I think, righting what is arguably one of the most, I think, heinous things, which is the taking of human life. And I think that we will be able to put some teeth into trying to do something about it. I myself am a proponent of the heartbeat bill, which basically says that if a doctor can detect a heartbeat on a baby in the womb, that baby cannot be aborted, because it's proof that this is a living being. And we have passed some legislation that during the past year, we passed two particular pieces of legislation indicating our pro-life stance, one being the Born Alive Abortion Survivor Act. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not.
I am, yeah.
But essentially what that means is that if a woman goes in to have an abortion, and that abortion fails, if people call it a botched abortion, or if for some reason it's not a successful abortion and the baby is born alive, then it would be incumbent upon those healthcare providers and others to take life-saving measures as if they would any other baby born alive. And I don't think that is at all radical or anything else. It is basically saying this baby was born alive and we're going to try to save it. And that bill passed. Unfortunately, it was vetoed, and we don't have the ability to override. There was one other bill that passed too that was vetoed, and that was a very common sense bill regarding the fact that you should not be able to have an abortion based on race of a child or sex of a child or some disability like Down syndrome. And you should not be able to have an abortion just for those reasons. Kind of selective something that we just don't want to do. But yet that was vetoed as well. And I just find that just very disturbing.
You would think that anybody who would take a baby who's born alive and is outside of the womb and is alive, that would constitute life. But Virginia and New York, in anticipation of Roe versus Wade being overturned, actually passed legislation that you could sit there and say, I want that baby dead. Because it was a botched abortion, as you said. And that's just unbelievable.
Well, and the Born Alive Protection Act in the U.S. House has been there for, a year and a half, 2 years, and Nancy Pelosi won't allow it to even come for a vote. So it's unbelievable.
I tell you, anybody that would take that stance is so hard-hearted, and I mean, it's evil. That's not just a mistake. That's not an opinion. That's pure evil.
Yeah, it's about power
and Andrew,
now, not
and
about
Andrew,
right and wrong.
my wife works or volunteers for the Pregnancy Resource Center here in our county. And I am so proud of her for doing that. And she has been trained, she's a nurse, and she has been trained now to use the ultrasounds. And it is an amazing thing to hear the stories about how these young women, when they come in, possibly abortion-minded, when they are able to see the ultrasound, how they just change so much more times than not, that they understand fully that this is a life, this is a baby, this isn't something part of my body or whatever. This is a really separate life. And it's really encouraging to hear the stories of those women who have taken steps and saved their baby and not have the abortion. And these pregnancy resource centers all over the country, my hat's off to them, because they work with these women not only to help them at a time of crisis and encourage them, but if they choose to have the baby, then they will work with them afterwards. And I think, they would probably, even after, if a woman decided to have an abortion, that does not mean they don't love those women.
Absolutely.
Because they have made a decision and they want to make sure that woman still is loved and actually ultimately comes to know Jesus Christ. And that's where it turns lives around.
Well, I helped start 4 pregnancy centers here in our area, and I was on the board of directors for many years and still am their biggest supporter and contributor. And we've put sonogram machines in each one of the centers, and I think the stats are that 85 to 90% of all of the people who see their child on a sonogram decide to go ahead and give birth. So we have over 6,000 pregnancy resource centers in the U.S. and less than 600 Planned Parenthoods. And yet Planned Parenthood is saying that if they were to be closed or defunded, that women wouldn't have anywhere to go. And there is nothing that Planned Parenthood provides that the pregnancy resource centers don't provide, and do it better and with more availability, except abortion. That's it.
And when you hear the debate sometimes on these kinds of bills from the other side, from folks who are very, very liberal on this, it just breaks your heart to hear the kinds of arguments that are made to try to justify the kinds of things that we just talked about, that, a baby is born alive. I don't know how much more black and white you can get with that, but yet they will come up with, they will begin to impugn, they will shift the argument and try to impugn the pregnancy resource centers and say that they're just some sort of place that is fooling women, or they're somehow tricking them, or that they don't have any real medical assistance, or anything that they can say to impugn those pregnancy resource centers. They try to shift the argument rather than the very true argument, which is this is a life. And no matter how you look at it, this is a life that's important. And I just cannot understand. It breaks my heart more than anything to hear people make the argument against those kinds of things. I feel sorry for those folks, because I think they're very much deceived. And I wish that some of those folks, some of those legislators, I think at some point in time would simply take the time and go visit some of these pregnancy resource centers and be with the staff and the volunteers and see the kind of compassionate work that they do. I'm real proud of my wife, Patty.
Amen. Yeah. So, Senator, we're probably going to take some questions here in 4 or 5 minutes, but one of the things I don't hear people talking about enough, we talk about critical race theory, about the mandates, the overreach of government, et cetera, but man, this $3.5 trillion bailout and stuff, our debt is going through the roof and it's unsustainable. How do you feel about all of this? You being in the legislature, what's happening?
It is absolutely unbelievable to me, the amount of federal money that is, I would say, raining down from heaven, but I wouldn't say that anymore because of the Congress, the way it is right now. But it is literally pouring into the states. And some people would think that's a good thing. And, it's coming our way. So we're faced as a legislature to spend money. And maybe that's not a bad thing, but we've got to spend it in a way that fits the guidelines. And at the same time, we have to spend it wisely. And, it's like drinking from a fire hose. You get all this money, and our biggest concern is that it not get wasted at the state level and put into, I've heard stories of housing authorities that were given money in North Carolina, and the money doesn't actually end up going to help provide assistance. Now, a lot of it does, to provide assistance for folks who need it. And that's a good thing. You can make that argument. But there's so much, and it's coming in such tranches that they had to go find ways to spend that money. So they went out and bought 2 cars for the office. They bought all kinds of new office furniture and that kind of stuff. And it's like, they got to find ways to spend this money and under the guidelines. And in terms of the federal deficit, I think it's going to cause inflation far beyond what we have experienced to this date. If we don't do something to rein in federal spending, it's
There's
out of
an article
control.
on that subject right now in today's issue of the Epoch Times on what they've done, and that's creating a structural atmosphere for inflation. It's really interesting. You're exactly right on that. And Senator, can't the state of North Carolina say no to any of that money? Why do you say you're forced to spend it?
Well, I suppose you could turn it down, but the reality is that I don't know of any state that has done that. And there are some good things, again, that come about as a result of the money, but it's just where that money's coming from. You and I are paying for that, and everybody in the country is paying for it. and it may do some good things. I think that there are lots of examples where the PPP money kept businesses and nonprofits and so forth afloat during the COVID last year. But then again, the extra additional money that was given for unemployment, once the economy began to change a little bit, it actually worked against us, because now, or up until especially until September, it was basically paying people more to stay at home than to go get a job, and therefore there was a worker shortage. So it cuts both ways.
You can argue against our financial deficit from just a financial standpoint, but I've got 5 pages of quotes here from congressmen, presidents, going back to the founding of our nation, that say that the government does not have the right to take on charity and welfare. And let me just read one of them here from none other than Congressman Davy Crockett.
All right.
And this is back in 1884, I guess it is. Is that right? I thought he was earlier than that.
Yeah.
So the date may be wrong. But anyway, this is Davy Crockett, and he said that it's not yours to give, talking about money to people. Says, Congress has not the power to appropriate this money as an act of charity. Every member of this floor knows it. I will give 1 week's pay to the object, and if every member of Congress will do the same, it will amount to more than the bill asks. We have the right as individuals to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity, but as members of Congress, we have no right to appropriate a dollar of the public money. And you can just go on, Herbert Hoover, Grover Cleveland, on and on. I think it was Gerald Ford that says a government that's big enough to give you everything you need is also big enough to take away from you everything you've got. So I think that we could argue against all of this social welfare on the basis that the government was not intended to deal with all of the problems. The church and individuals were originally tasked with that, and we made a major mistake when FDR began to start putting in all of the welfare programs.
Yep, that's right.
Well, and an interesting read, of course, is Marvin Olasky's books dealing with that very issue, and he brought out, this was early 90s, that he talked about how exactly what you said. Initially, all the churches, all the hospitals, most of the hospitals, the orphanages, most of our groups that we think of today, the Salvation Army, the YMCAs, Red Cross, all of those were Christian-based organizations at the time. And built out of those people living out of their Christian beliefs and starting those kinds of things. And unfortunately, over the years, many of those organizations have maybe still doing good work, but I think they've lost a lot of their Christian foundation.
Yeah, and the hospitals especially, they begin to start taking government money, Medicaid, Medicare for things, and now I have read reports that the doctors who are speaking out against the vaccination and the health risk associated with it are people who are not on staff at a hospital and aren't getting government money, but all of the government-paid people are obligated to regurgitate all of the stuff that CDC and the NIH are saying. So again, here's the money. The love of money is the root of all evil, and it gained government access to things that they should not have been dictating.
Amen. Money.
Very good.
All right, so we need to take some questions here. We got any questions?
Yes, sir, we do. Here's one on that very subject, Andrew, from Stacia. And Stacia asks, are there any bills, I think this is probably for North Carolina, being written to protect the doctors and nurses who are coming against this medical tyranny, the mandatory vaccines? They see firsthand this government overreach in our medical industry. If they're prescribing anything other than these mandated vaccines, they risk losing their jobs. What's going on in North Carolina on that?
Well, there's the big argument going on regarding whether how can the government basically tell private industries how to run their business, and that's always the problem. Is that we have private businesses, which most hospitals and most those kinds of things are. So how do we intervene, and how do we tell them how to run their business? I quite frankly think that we should be able to use some of the controls that we do have, whether it be permitting or some of the licenses and things like that, to put some pressure on some of these folks that they should not be demanding that people get the vaccines or that they be released. I think it's very counterproductive for them to be doing that.
So, but, Senator, is that your personal opinion, or is that the?
Yes.
Okay, so the legislature there in North Carolina.
Legislatively, there may be some legislation that's been proposed, but a lot of this came about. Our deadline has passed for a new legislation, and a lot of this has come up, unfortunately, after that deadline. So I don't know that there will be anything put in this session. It could be, and if there is, I certainly would be supportive of that.
So it'd have to be a special session, I guess.
Very good. Well, here's another question, which is from a viewer wanting to know if North Carolina has had any election integrity issues. And I think you border Georgia. This viewer is saying, how did you avoid similar election integrity problems like Georgia faced?
North Carolina, a lot of people argue that we did not have a lot of election integrity issues. I think that there were some myself personally. And I think that one thing that did help us was that we did not have the Dominion machines that I think Georgia had.
That's good.
And I think that helped us a lot. Some of the other things that helped North Carolina was that we did pass some legislation during the election that sort of would help stanch some of the stuff that went on in other states. However, I have to say that I'm still a little skeptical, and I believe that there were some things that had to have happened. I just don't think a lot of, how do you elect a Republican president and Republican lieutenant governor and virtually all Council of State offices Republican, and a North Carolina U.S. Senate Republican, and then elect a governor, a Democrat, and then 3 other officers of the Council of the State, all of which, those are the 4, the Attorney General, the Governor, the State Auditor, and the Secretary of State, all of which have oversight or audit capabilities of elections. So I am very concerned about that. I think there are a lot of other people who are concerned about that. The House Freedom Caucus has called for more investigation into this. I think a lot of people have said, well, that the governor's race, it was just a lot of otherwise Republicans who kind of felt like that the mask issue with our candidate, he didn't take COVID seriously, so a lot of people voted in favor of our governor. There's no doubt that our governor he was on TV every day and probably amounted to millions and millions of dollars of basically free advertising that he would get every day. So there's some argument that kind of helped in that relationship in terms of the election, but I'm still very concerned about it, and I know there are a lot of other people concerned about it. I don't know that there's a whole lot that we can do for the past election. We can continue to look into it, but I think what we have got to do, and we did do, is pass some legislation that would for election integrity, and that is we passed a bill that would make election day, and that all the ballots need to be returned and counted by, they need to be returned by election day. That's a pretty simple concept, if you ask me, especially since we have now almost seems like 17 or 20 days of early voting in North Carolina. Seems like it goes on for all year. But we passed that again. It was not, it was vetoed. And we also have passed legislation that would prohibit what we call collusive settlements. We had a situation in North Carolina where our election laws were challenged by a third party. They they brought suit against the legislature and the State Board of Elections, and our Attorney General and the State Board of Elections basically, I guess what you would call cut a deal, like a plea bargain, I guess, is the best I can come up with an analogy. But left out the legislature. The legislature was not involved in that deal with the judge. And so we have passed a bill that would prohibit that sort of thing. And also we passed a bill which would prohibit outside money from coming into our State Board of Election. You know, there a lot of these big tech billionaires were giving money to state boards of elections for whatever reason, voter education, I suppose. And, you know, that just doesn't seem right to me. And we passed a bill that would stop that too. Again, we're somewhat limited in what we can do because every agency that would do an audit is essentially controlled by the other party. And so, you know, we just got to, we do what we can and continue to monitor, and hopefully we don't have any issues in the future.
I think at that conference Andrew and I met you at, they passed a model election reform law that had a lot of important stuff in it. Has North Carolina taken that up and considered that bill?
I'm sure that we will or would. Again, we continue to face a situation, and it sounds like a broken record, where we simply just don't have the ability to override these vetoes. But I suspect that, yes, we will probably see more and more election bills to prohibit these kinds of things. We've got to do what we can. We can't just sit back and do nothing. And just because the governor it happens to veto a lot of bills, but we will do what we can.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the big problems with the 2020 elections, that it's only the legislature that can change the voting procedures, and yet there were municipalities changing the things, allowing extra time for ballots to be counted and on all kinds of things. And that was one of the challenges that Giuliani and Sidney, was it
Powell?
Powell. That was one of the things they were challenging, that they were just making these changes on a municipality basis without the legislature, which is against the Constitution.
And we faced a similar situation in North Carolina with our State Board of Elections, and they were essentially, again, doing this plea bargaining, if whatever you want to call it, a deal, a settlement, and also basically trying to change procedures in midstream in the election, which just because they said, well, we have the emergency ability to do that under COVID, which we dispute. We do not think that they had that ability to do that. And so we are trying to, one of the other things that is related to elections is we are trying to curb the emergency powers of the governor. And this should be done whether it be a Republican governor, Democrat governor, or whoever else. In North Carolina, our laws for emergency powers are pretty stiff. They're pretty strong, but they were passed with the intention of helping in situations with natural disasters, with floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that. Nobody ever anticipated that these laws would be utilized to what started out to be a sort of a 15-day moratorium to slow down the curve of the virus would now stretch into a year and a half worth of executive orders that have shut down businesses and done everything else.
Here in Colorado, our governor was only given the authority for executive powers for 30 days, and then he had to go to the legislature to get an extension, and he didn't, and he just kept extending for months, 6 months, and there's still restrictions and things in place that he's using those emergency powers for. And that's the reason that I sued the government, the Colorado government, and fought back, and praise God, we won.
That's right.
Thank you, Richard, for standing and helping us do that.
And Matt Staver. Well, Can we squeeze in another one here?
One last question for
I
you.
wanted to toss this out. One bit of good news and bright light in North Carolina is your lieutenant governor, if I'm correct, Mark Robinson. He's been getting a lot of headlines lately, catching some flack. And what do you think of Lieutenant Governor Robinson?
We have an outstanding lieutenant governor, and I'll make no bones about that to anybody. He is a fine Christian man. In every speech that he ever gives, the first thing he says is he gives credit to his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And I think God honors him for that. He is plain spoken. He relates and is able to convey messages to, I would say, the common man. He does it with, he's humorous. He uses humor, but he's also very forceful and very strong in his message and very, very tough. And I like it. I think he does a good job. He does a good job serving as the president of the Senate and conducts the meetings when he is present. He does a great job of doing that. And I think he's got a great platform for education. He's certainly against critical race theory, which I think he lends a great deal of credibility to that effort. He's also very much plugged in to trying to reduce the amount of political correctness and the social justice kinds of things that are, I think, really detrimental in our curriculum and education. He's been a great proponent of trying to reduce that sort of thing. And he's fearless. And, you may or may not you may agree with him or not, but I think the man speaks his mind, and that is a refreshing thing.
Amen.
One way or the other.
Yeah.
In any kind of form of political office.
Well, Senator, we're about out of time, but before we let you go, do you have a website or anything? If somebody wants to contact you, can you give your web address?
Sure. It's tedforsenate.com is my web address, and you can reach me through that, and I would be happy to, communicate to anybody. I have my email. I don't mind giving my email. It's ted@tedforsenate.com.
That's great.
@tedforsenate.com.
Well, we thank you for taking the time and coming on, and thank you for standing up. Thank you for running for office and getting involved. And we just pray that God is giving you favor and amplifying your voice so that it's making a difference there. Appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you, Andrew and Richard. It's a real blessing to serve, and I am blessed by serving, but I hope that I can be a blessing to others in the capacity that God has placed me in. I really feel like that that's what I want to do, is they say, do as much good as you can all the time, and that's what I want to do. And I thank you both for what y'all do.
So we're going to have to let you go. We're about out of time, but thanks to CTN for putting us on their network. Again, we want to thank you, and we want to thank all of you for watching. Remember that we do this every Monday night, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and remember that this week, Tuesday through Friday, we've got our Truth Lovers broadcast that's on at 3 to 4:30, a live call-in program. Watch it. You'll be blessed. Good night.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.